Good afternoon, Roger said, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good afternoon again. It's really a pleasure being here within this wonderful community. So we are heading towards the last session of the day, which means that we will try to put everything which has been said and reflected into perspective. A lot has been said already about change. And we are convinced that by now, each of you has already made the reflection to understand what this would mean for your business. So let's try to taste the pulse with a little poll.
Exactly. So we see you're already getting active. Let's just read out the question. When thinking about the strategy for your next fund, which of these statements is more relatable for you? Evolve to stay ahead of the crowd, incorporate any lessons learned, transform, or risk being out of the market, or never change a winning setup. So it seems most of you were very well involved in the previous topics, or maybe even convinced before you came here. But there seems to be quite a preference for evolve to stay ahead of the crowd, which goes, of course, very much in line of what has been said and will be said also in this session. No one who doesn't want to change a winning setup? Yes, there's one or two. No, just joking. Okay, I think we can move on.
So we seem all to be convinced that we need to change. And changing is not easy. Changing is difficult. It means that we have to leave the known and we have to embrace the unknown. But change is also the basis of the theory of the evolution of the species. And clearly at EIF, we certainly do not want the private capital industry in Europe to fall victim of Darwinian selection because not being able to change. We at EIF, we feel compelled to the change for many reasons. We are an institution with a mission, and as part of our mission, we need to constantly adapt to the evolving needs of the markets that we are due to serve. And as an institution, we have the tools to do it. We can afford doing it. And therefore, we should be among the first movers. We should show the path. So what we will discuss today is about our ambition, our aim as EIF to catalyze the change towards the future of the private capital industry in Europe.
So now we will look at what exactly that means for the EIF, what is our call. And it is threefold. So first, EIF is not a unique LP. I think this doesn't come as a surprise to you. We're at the intersection between implementing policy priorities into the investment strategy while seeking attractive commercial returns, as we can't be alone in a fund. We're ready to take risk, but we want to take it with other players. If we move back 20 to 30 years for private equity, maybe 5 to 10 years for private credit, there was almost no ecosystem in the market to support or to provide this type of financing. So initially, the idea was really to support players that would move into this space and provide SMEs with this type of financing. As the market develops, the needs also develop, and new strategies and new managers come up that we would like to support. Following the breakout of the COVID, also the Ukraine war, many private players or LPs took a hesitant approach, waiting to see. The EIF is not subject to the denominator effect. Our role is to actively respond to crisis and provide confidence to the market. Following COVID, we invested 30 billion of counter-cyclical investments. And all of this converges into the idea of supporting a sustainable growth for a better Europe.
So we have identified 3 main strategic priorities for EIF. The first one is the green transition. The green transition is to preserve the future of human race on Earth. The second, and we have been hearing talking a lot about that in the panel is the digital transformation through innovation. That is to upgrade our businesses through the use of new technologies. And last, the industrial resilience to make sure that we foster the sovereignty and the self-sufficiency of our economy. Now, yesterday, from Louise, our keynote speaker, we heard a very important concept, which is that we need to start thinking about systems being interconnected. And these three strategic priorities are indeed very much connected to each other. They all contribute to the achievement of the objectives of a sustainable growth for Europe. Now, in order to move towards this direction, a lot of efforts need to be made. This vision is substantially now validated by the analysis which has been mandated by the European Commission to the former ECB governor, Mario Draghi, about the future of European competitiveness. You've heard a lot about this report by now. The big number that is mentioned there is that it is advocating for hundreds of billions of annual investments into a number of areas, including in particular those three priorities. 800 billion per year is a huge amount. In a decade, this means trillions. It is estimated to be about 5% of European GDP. And in front of a challenge of this magnitude, no one can make it alone. To succeed, we need to mobilize all our efforts together. And the idea at EIF has always been, and even more so will continue being, partnering with the key players in the industry. So partnering with you, the European GPs, and your role here is fundamental and cannot be replaced.
So what does that mean? Will the EIF now only invest in funds doing solar panels? No, you will see there are a lot of different types of strategies which we will look at, but there are some concepts, or one concept that will come up again and again, so we would like to introduce it here. It refers to one, supporting solutions, what we call the vertical approach. And then, on the other hand, the horizontal or transversal approach of companies implementing these solutions that were developed. And we saw one example previously, for example, for Decathlon, and there are many other in the market. And the important point here is both strategies are needed. We need solutions, we need digitals, we need clean tech solutions, etc. But we also need companies that are ready to implement them and future-proof. And linking it to the strategies, managers that then invest into these companies.
So let's start diving into the first one of these three priorities, the green transition. Now, a lot has been said, so I don't think we need to convince you any longer about the need to invest in our future to preserve our well-being on Earth. But again, another interesting concept which was introduced yesterday is the fact that as an investment community, we need to start thinking beyond the economic cost of inaction, and we need to start thinking about where is the value, where are the opportunities. So many analyses evidence the cost of inaction. Let's start from there. One interesting analysis is the one made by the World Economic Forum. It is about how quickly climate-related risks will become overwhelming for our society compared to any other societal or economic risk. And it is amazing to see that in a very short time, in less than 10 years, the top 4 climate-related risks will be overwhelming all the others. There are many other assessments which support the same importance of us acting to avoid the bad consequences. We have seen, for example, mentioned this morning again, the study made by the Stockholm Resilience Center about the planetary boundaries. It's very telling. 6 out of 9 of those boundaries have already been exceeded. So again, the question for us as investors is, if we put resources into that, would our efforts be vain? Is there anything we can still do? Certainly there is a lot. But the most important message is that we do not have any time to lose. We have to act now on that.
All right, we need to act. But haven't there been a lot of agreements signed? We're already on the right way. aren't we? Unfortunately, client scientists show a different picture, and we can see it here. This is a scenario analysis carried out by the Network for Greening the Financial System, and the current policy scenarios, meaning looking at what has been implemented or what is committed to be implemented, still lead to a 12.5 loss in GDP related to physical risk by 2050. The cost of inaction is larger than the cost of action. We have other opportunities. We can now take on the responsibility to transition, take up the costs now, in order to make a livable future for our children. However, as you can see in the graph, in the coming years, the cost of physical risks, meaning floods, hurricanes, droughts, etc., is lower than the costs of transition. So we need to be ready to change and future-proof and go beyond the terms of politicians and CEOs.
Now let's focus about where the opportunities lie. So what are we looking for? For those strategies having a vertical investment approach, opportunities lies in investing to develop and build the value chains of technological solutions. And technological solutions can span a broad range. From energy, so think about renewables, think about the value chain of hydrogen as a means to store energy, any other storage system solutions. It could go towards food and agri. Think about agriculture methods, food supply. Think about soil regeneration or natural ingredients replacing chemicals. Or it could be about any other green technology, transportation or new materials to replace plastics. And here the opportunity lies. In Europe, we are at the forefront of green technologies. We hold 38% more patents related to green technologies than US, twice as many as China. So it's a solid base to build on for our industries. Then, after having developed solutions, we need to apply them. We need to implement and roll them out across all industries. We heard this morning, Uli mentioned, the panel took it again over, 80% of existing assets will have a fundamental contribution towards the net zero. We need to invest to apply the technological solutions to pursue the decarbonization of industries, households, to pursue energy saving, energy reduction. That is going to be most likely the best fuel we have for the future. Or to implement circularity solutions, we have heard from Decathlon. So both will be absolutely necessary to get to the net zero objectives by 2050. Without any of the two, we would not make it.
So now, looking at what approaches can be taken in an investment strategy, well, we have the question on ESG. Let's say initially, and I'm sure you all remember, when ESG was almost still seen as the enemy to financial returns and maybe even fiduciary duty, the relationship evolved over time, that it was seen as a risk mitigant, to some extent as a value enhancer. But why we are together here is to say that we need to go beyond ESG. The idea is to have or to look for positive and measurable outcomes alongside financial returns. Positive intentional outcomes from an environmental, from a social perspective. We can look at decarbonization, we can look at circularity, we can look at inclusion of vulnerable groups into the society. I think we have seen a number of examples already this morning, and non-financial KPIs are tailor-made to the strategy that you implement. It leaves a lot of room for creativity, but let it be intentional.
So EIF has been stimulating this change as an early mover. We have been investing in green technologies since already 15 years ago. But the message we would like to share with you today here is that nowadays the whole market is changing. And this changing is happening at an unprecedented pace. I've never seen such a quick change in the private equity and private credit industry in the last 20 years. Just to give you an idea, just 3 years ago, strategies which were focused on sustainability in private equity and private credit were rather an exception. Just 3 years ago, when we at EIF were compiling our investment budget for 2022, very much in this period of the year, we were thinking, how much will we be able to invest in private equity and private credit funds focused on sustainability? And we were hoping maybe we can do 1, 2. Pipeline was scarce. From the chart you can see we have not only heavily exceeded those expectations, but the pickup has been very quick. In 2024, about 50% of the investments we'll make in private equity and private credit will be focused on sustainability strategies. In these days, we do not have to convince any longer the fund managers, the investors, about the opportunity. In these days, more than 60% of our pipeline, the proposals that we receive every day, are focused on sustainability. So this is the sign that the market is changing, and the change is happening very, very quickly, cannot be missed out.
Are we ready to move to the next strategic priority, which is innovation and digitalization? Let's start with some figures from the Draghi report. So we have here a graph looking at the labor productivity comparing US and Europe. Looks quite fine when we look at it like this. After the Second World War, it has been increasing relatively steadily, so we're pretty much at par with the US. But wait, it's 1990. What happened afterwards? Here, what happened in 1990? The ICT sector came up, and Europe has been struggling to integrate digital solutions, starting from the first one up to AI today, into its business models. If we go on at the same pace, at the same, let's say, growth since 2015, which is 0.7, we can only keep GDP constant until 2050, and might probably need to think about if we're able to implement other strategic priorities, such as, for example, defense or decarbonization, which we're also talking about this morning, or have a high amount of public spending. 70% of the new value created in the world is expected to be linked to digital technologies. In the US, revenues coming from these technologies are increasing. In Europe, unfortunately, they are decreasing. There is one main sector in which Europe outperforms the US. Can you imagine which one it is? It is public administration. I think we have some homework to do.
Indeed, thank you, Priscilla. So we have heard it. Digital technologies are pervasive. They are fundamental to the functioning of any business, and they affect all sectors. So we like dates. We remember dates easily. So we have a date here, 19th July 2024. Do you remember what happened on that date? Probably many of us in this room have suffered consequences from what happened. And the more we suffer, the more easily we will remember. So for me, it's hard to forget. I was traveling and I was stuck at an airport for 7 hours, which implied that I was getting to my destination very late, and I missed my son's birthday party, so it's hard to forget. Now, 19th July 2024 is the date of the big failure of the CrowdStrike cybersecurity software, which is adopted by Microsoft and by many other cloud service providers. So the affected industries were absolutely across all the world. From easy things like you could not access your online documents, office documents, from the flights which were halted, planes grounded, so I was stuck in the airport, or hospitals. They were struggling in keeping the surgery rooms operating. But also banks were not able to clear transactions on real time. So the cost, the sheer cost of this event, this disruption, has been estimated for the companies who suffered from it to be $5.4 billion. But on top of that, these companies showed vulnerability. So they lost $21 billion in market cap due to that event. So that gives us an idea about why we need to invest into digital technologies. In Europe, we need to be on the forefront of the technological solutions. We need to reduce the concentration on critical resources. And we need to do it right. Because if we get it wrong, like in this case, the cost is going to be enormous. To the opposite, if we do it right, the opportunity is massive.
Again, our known graph on the vertical and horizontal approaches. On the vertical, let's maybe again start with some figures. 70% of AI models that are currently used are produced in the US. The largest European cloud operators, talking about the largest, only have a 2% share in Europe. And we could go on this, but let's move maybe to the horizontal ones, where right now AI has been implemented in roughly 11% of companies. A target for 2030 is 75%. So here is also the question on to what extent can we remain competitive, future-proofed, and also have the relevant revenues implementing the new technologies, digital models, energy optimizations, facility management, softwares for education, etc. The idea is wide. You see some examples here. But we need to choose wisely in order to overcome the gap we are currently in. Similar to what we have seen before on the EIF volumes, the reduced valuation in tech did not hold in front of the private capital. But the main message to pass here is that there is potential for differentiation and for investment.
Very good. Let's move then to the third strategic priority, the industrial resilience. So what does it mean investing to make the European economy more self-sustainable? 30 years ago, globalization was the mantra. And now we have come to the point where we're discovering that there are unintended consequences to us. So again, in this case, we like dates. And we like to use a date to contextualize the matter. So you remember what happened in spring 21, that was just around the COVID period, we were still in lockdowns. And I don't know if it happened to you, but it was very hard to go to a shop and being able to buy a home appliance, like a microwave or a dishwasher. Or if you wanted to buy a new car, you went to the dealer, placed your order, and they were promising you delivery time of 18 months. So that may be standard for Porsche or Ferrari, but not for a normal car. Now, that was all the consequences of the global crisis in the supply of microchips. Do you know how many microchips are there in a car? I was astonished because I read it. I'm looking for a new car. And depending on the model, there are between 800 and 4,000 microchips in a car. Any sensor has a microchip. So this gives us an idea about why the microchip industry, semiconductors, are strategic for Europe. Because Europe is still one of the main producers of automotive or white goods, or any other industry. But we have other examples. For example, of industries where Europe is leader, like pharmaceutical. We have some of the largest pharmaceutical companies in Europe, and interestingly enough, when the active ingredients, they run off patent, then their production is moved outside of Europe to low-cost countries. Cost is everything at that point in time. But then whenever there is a little disruption, an incident in the levels of production quality, then we have difficulties in finding medicines. So I was reading this morning an article in Luxembourg, here, they are fearing we're missing 278 key medicaments, key drugs. In France, if you go to the pharmacy and you ask for paracetamol, you're likely having difficulties in getting it. Or any of you who use antacids, like I do, will know that one of the most common and oldest antacids in the world, which is ranitidine, is banned from Europe for 3 years now because of production issues in India of the APIs. So how important is for us to invest in making sure that these sectors can feed the European economy without disruptions?
Some more, now looking at what the way Europe is dependent on other economies and how vulnerable we can be about global supply chains. Probably you remember this vessel stuck in the Suez Canal. I think for all of you, the picture comes to mind. And it's incredible what impact one vessel can have on global trade. It was only stuck there for 6 days, which led to a loss of $54 billion. Another situation, which is more recent now, are the Houthi attacks on the Red Sea, forcing cargoes to take a larger route, increasing operational cost, increasing product prices, and cascading down on productivity. So the question is, how can we onshore as much as possible to reduce dependencies?
And like this, there are many other examples. And it is the role of our investments along the key priorities of the industrial resilience to make sure that we mitigate all these risks and we build these opportunities for Europe. Now, one interesting thing is that while we transform European economy in this way, this will have a structural impact on the workforce. Because certain skills will not be necessary any longer. Think about the implementation of artificial intelligence. Many jobs will disappear. But other jobs will be created. Other skills will be necessary. Think about what we discussed before about the replacement of materials and chemicals. So nowadays, engineers on chemicals or materials are among the top wanted skills. So there is a stunning number of 54% of European companies who declare that they're struggling in recruiting people, talents with the right skills. So which means that on one side, there are many positions which remain vacant. And on the other hand, unemployment is biting on people who are living on skills which are getting outdated. So we have to invest, and this is again an opportunity and a need. We have to invest a lot in reskilling, upskilling. We can build on European strengths. So Europe has one of the best developed educated systems for STEM subjects: science, technical matters, engineering, and mathematics. And it is one of the most open economies in the world. So we can build on this trend. And this will serve not only to manage the societal impact of the transformation, but it will also ensure that we will have the ability to continue producing brain fuel for the future of our economy.
Just to look at some examples, what this can mean concretely. Well, investments on the solution providers in terms of semiconductors, robotics, defense and space, active pharmaceutical ingredients linked to the example Marco was making. And the first one refers to batteries. Here another piece of data. What is the share of batteries produced in Europe? It's 3%. There can be many reasons for it. Some of it may be linked to raw materials. And this brings us directly to a question on circularity. Some raw materials don't exist in Europe, and we will probably never have them. So the only way to actually keep them here is through circularity. This can then lead to cost efficiencies. I mean, there are also economic factors attached to it. We will strengthen the local employment, elevating skills, linking to what Marco said before. Several ways to reduce the dependencies and strengthen Europeans' industrial resilience.
So we have been talking now about the 3 key strategic priorities of EIF. And while pursuing those 3 key strategic priorities, we will continue making sure that our overarching institutional objectives are not going to be neglected. We will continue being very much rooted into our institutional foundations to continue stimulating cohesion across European markets. We need to realize the capital market union, now the savings and investment union. We will continue fostering the development of markets which are less mature, and we will continue promoting attention towards diversity and inclusion. So starting from cohesion, cohesion is all about ensuring that the opportunities for companies to access capital are equally available across Europe in relation to the needs of each market. So it means that we have to invest, and at EIF we are really trying to keep an eye on this. We need to invest on the areas where this is most needed, and not only to invest where the majority of the funds are available. It is within the transformation that the economy is witnessing, it is our fundamental duty to make sure that the market will be built in a balanced way and opportunities will be offered across all of Europe.
And linking to the initial question on building the ecosystem, sometimes we also invest in existing players, setting up new strategies, so basically rejuvenating the GP landscape, while at the same time supporting new entrants. And this is illustrated by the following figure, where you can see that the majority of investments EIF does is in first-time and emerging managers.
Let's talk about the next overarching objective, diversity. In order to succeed into this transformation, we need to mobilize all our human capital, all. And we need to mobilize it, I like to say, to have it all in the right places, across all the levels of the organizations, across all the levels of the economy. And on top of the social value, diversity is unanimously recognized as being conducive to better decision-making. So the investment industry is no exception. However, do you know where we are in the private capital industry in terms of gender diversification? It's only 16%, the share of female investment professionals within our industry, 16%. So of course things are improving. But if we were to take a passive stance and let the market do its job, it would take about 60 years to get to parity. So we need to act, we need to do something. So at EIF, we are paying attention, stimulating the adoption of diversity and inclusion into the investments we make. And at the end of 24, we are heading towards a proportion of the funds invested by EIF, where in the fund managers team, there is high attention to diversity, which is about 40%. 40% is not bad, it's better than the average. But it's certainly not enough. Not enough because not only if we want to achieve parity, it means that obviously we need to get to 100% of funds incorporating criteria of diversity and inclusion. But on top of that, we will need to cascade the same attention to diversity to the portfolio companies, to the final beneficiaries, so to all the levels of our economic fabric.
Now, the question might be on your mind, what does this mean now for the investment strategy? As investment professionals, we look for alpha creation, value creation. There are traditional ways to do it, some of which are mentioned here, and I'm sure they're all familiar to all of us. Underlining what we have been saying today, to focus on an Alpha 2.0, going beyond the traditional alpha creators. And here you see some ideas which reflect what has been presented today. New technologies, green investments, energy efficiency, resilience, diversity improvements, etc. What we see here will then, of course, be mirrored in how the EIF will look at a strategy. Does that mean we don't care about the traditional value creators anymore or about the financial viability of a fund? Of course not. This is the basic building block required to actually attract investors into a fund. But then, to distinguish, there are other factors and which will be assessed and also incorporated in how they are intentionally taken on board for the strategy. At the same time, EIF's focus and DNA on the lower mid-market and SME financing will of course remain, and we will continue looking at this. But we look forward to seeing the enhanced value creation.
And these concepts, don't they resonate very well with what we have heard from our keynote speaker yesterday, from Louise, about moving from a linear economy to a regenerative economy? Or what we heard from Pierre this morning about Decathlon in changing the business models. So we look for strategies that can bring value towards the achievement of the 3 key strategic priorities that EIF is pursuing, and can do that not occasionally, because by investing in many companies, we will to a certain extent contribute. We are looking for strategies which are designed in order to help us achieve those objectives, which are doing it intentionally. And if a strategy is designed to create value by changing the companies, then it should be very easy to set up mechanisms to measure the achievements. It should be very easy to define the proper KPIs to illustrate the non-financial objectives, to set the objectives at the very beginning, from the outset, and to track their progress. And if we are investing with that objective, then we should not be certainly worried by aligning the incentive schemes that we have towards the achievement of those objectives, because that is totally part of the reason why we are investing. So as you can understand, this is a bit of an evolution in the approach, a change in the approach. And many players in the market have already embarked into this journey. Many players are getting into that direction. If you will decide to get into that direction, you will not do it to please EIF. If you will decide to get into that direction, you will do it to ensure the future of your investment business. If you will decide to get into that direction, we are sure you will be able to convince any investor, not only EIF.
So at the EIF, we are here to catalyze change, but change cannot be done alone. Are you ready to embark on the journey with us? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening.